Some of history's most astonishing secrets aren't locked away in vaults or buried in lost cities. They're hanging right in front of us, woven into the very fabric of time. Take the Bayeux Tapestry, a staggering 70-meter-long masterpiece of medieval embroidery. At first glance, it's a vivid retelling of the Norman Conquest, a dramatic clash of kings and armies that changed the course of England forever. But look closer, and you'll start to notice the subtle oddities, the strange symbols tucked into the margins, the mysterious figures lurking in the background, the puzzling scenes that don't quite fit the official narrative. What if this tapestry isn't just a celebration of William the Conqueror's victory? What if it's a coded message, a hidden story waiting to be unraveled? For centuries, historians have treated the Bayeux Tapestry as a straightforward historical record, a medieval comic strip of sorts. Yet every thread in this breathtaking work seems to whisper a different tale. Why does Harold Godwinson, the defeated English king, appear so noble in some scenes, almost like a tragic hero? Why do strange, otherworldly creatures creep along the borders, watching the unfolding drama with silent intensity? And what about those cryptic Latin inscriptions? Could they be more than just captions? The deeper you dig, the more this ancient fabric feels less like a simple chronicle and more like a carefully crafted puzzle, one that might rewrite what we think we know about this pivotal moment in history. This isn't just about decoding an old piece of needlework, it's about peeling back the layers of time to hear the voices that history tried to silence. The Bayeux Tapestry wasn't stitched in a day, and its secrets weren't meant to be uncovered in one either. Every stitch, every color, every seemingly insignificant detail could be a clue left behind by someone who dared to tell a different version of events. So let's step into the shadows of this medieval masterpiece together. By the end of this journey, you might never see history or the stories we've been told the same way again. Stretching nearly 70 meters long but standing just 50 centimeters tall, the Bayeux Tapestry is an astonishing feat of medieval storytelling, not woven as you might expect, but embroidered with colored wool on linen canvas. Created sometime in the 11th century, likely within a decade of the Battle of Hastings in 1066, this intricate piece isn't just a relic, it's a gripping visual chronicle of one of history's most pivotal moments. Picture a sprawling comic strip from the Middle Ages, bursting with over 50 scenes that catapult you into the drama, intrigue, and brute force of the Norman Conquest. But here's the twist. While it's often celebrated as a triumph of Norman propaganda, glorifying William the Conqueror's rise to power, the truth may be far more nuanced. Who crafted this monumental work? The answer remains one of history's quiet mysteries. While tradition credits Queen Matilda, William's wife, and her ladies-in-waiting, most scholars now believe it was commissioned by Bishop Odo, William's half-brother, and stitched by teams of skilled English embroiderers in Canterbury. That's right, the very people whose kingdom was conquered may have sewn the conqueror's story. This alone raises fascinating questions. Did these artisans weave subtle resistance into the fabric? Could the tapestry's portrayal of Harold Godwinson, sometimes noble, even sympathetic, hint at an untold perspective buried beneath the official narrative? And then there's the tapestry's sheer survival. Unlike fragile manuscripts or crumbling stonework, this embroidered epic endured wars, revolutions, and neglect, even narrowly escaping destruction during the French Revolution when it was nearly cut up to cover wagons. Today, housed in a dimly lit museum in Bayeux, France, it continues to mesmerize visitors with its vivid depictions of charging cavalry, flaming castles, and the haunting final scene of fallen English warriors. Yet for all its fame, the tapestry refuses to surrender all its secrets. The borders alone, crowded with mythical beasts, farming scenes, and cryptic fables, suggest a deeper, symbolic layer waiting to be decoded. So while it may seem like a straightforward celebration of Norman victory, every stitch invites us to look closer. What if this masterpiece isn't just a record of history, but a carefully crafted conversation between the conquerors and the conquered? The tapestry begins not with swords clashing or armies marching, but with a quiet moment of political intrigue. Harold Godwinson, the soon-to-be English king, kneeling before Duke William of Normandy. In this carefully embroidered scene, Harold places his hands on sacred relics, swearing an oath to support William's claim to the English throne. It's a moment loaded with tension, stitched in vivid colors. Harold's face unreadable, William seated tall on his throne, his fingers pressing into the arms of his chair as if bracing for betrayal. The Latin caption above them, where Harold made an oath to Duke William, seems straightforward, but the imagery hints at something deeper. Why does Harold's posture seem almost reluctant? And why do shadowy figures crowd the margins, their eyes fixed on the scene like silent witnesses? From there, the tapestry unfolds like a medieval epic, each panel propelling us toward inevitable conflict. Harold returns to England, his ship tossed by embroidered waves, only to be crowned king after the death of Edward the Confessor. The Normans cry foul, the oath broken, the betrayal complete. Then comes the drama of Halley's Comet streaking across the sky, its fiery tail stitched in jagged threads, a portent of doom hovering over Harold's reign. The English court gazes upward, their faces a mix of awe and dread, while messengers rush to tell William of the comet's appearance. In the margins, ghostly ships seem to materialize, as if the fabric itself is foreshadowing the Norman fleet's arrival. And then the battle. The tapestry's climax is a chaos of charging horses, falling soldiers, and arrows raining down like deadly threads. The infamous scene of Harold's death struck in the eye by an arrow, though some scholars debate whether this was a later addition, is rendered with haunting simplicity. His body collapses beneath the fray, while Norman knights trample over fallen English warriors. Yet even here, the tapestry refuses to be one-sided. Among the carnage, an English soldier swings his axe with heroic defiance, and the border below swirls with fallen shields and broken swords, a silent memorial to the defeated. By the time we reach the final panels where William is triumphantly crowned, the tapestry has delivered its official narrative, a story of oaths, betrayal, and divine justice. But look closer, and the threads whisper contradictions. Why does Harold's death scene mirror earlier depictions of noble fallen heroes? Why do the English soldiers, though outnumbered, fight with such striking valor? And what of the strange, almost mournful tone in the borders where Aesop's fables play out alongside scenes of farmers tending their fields, as if life, not conquest, is the true enduring theme? The tapestry's surface may declare Norman victory, but its stitches hum with untold stories. But the real intrigue of the Bayeux Tapestry lies in its unsettling details, the moments that defy straightforward history. Take the enigmatic figures lurking in the margins, a man with a club chasing a fox, a crouching archer with no clear allegiance, even a pair of nude figures entangled in the borders. These aren't random decorations. Medieval art was deliberate, every stitch intentional. So why include scenes of fables and farm work alongside a royal conquest? Some scholars believe these border vignettes are sly commentary, Aesop's fables about broken promises mirroring Harold's alleged oath, or farmers toiling undisturbed, a quiet reminder that life continues beyond the battles of kings. Then there's the comet. Halley's Comet blazes across the tapestry's sky, a celestial omen stitched with such urgency its tail seems to quiver. Historical records confirm the comet appeared in 1066, but here's the oddity. In the tapestry, it hovers directly over Harold's crowned head while terrified courtiers point upward. Meanwhile, a shadowy messenger sprints to tell William, an unverified detail that feels less like documentation and more like theatrical foreshadowing. Was this artistic license or a deliberate nod to the Normans' belief that the comet was divine endorsement of their cause? Even the battle scenes hold puzzling inconsistencies. Look closely at the fallen warriors. Some clutch peculiar weapons, not swords or spears, but farming tools. Were these hastily armed peasants or symbolic nods to the everyday lives disrupted by war? And then there's the mysterious Aelfgyva, a woman named in one panel, shown whispering with a cleric. No historical record explains her presence. Some speculate she's a representation of scandal or betrayal, a thread left dangling for those who knew the subtext. Perhaps most haunting is the final surviving panel, not of William's coronation, but of English soldiers fleeing beneath severed limbs and tangled reins. The original tapestry's ending is lost, but this abrupt halt feels deliberate. Was the missing section destroyed, or did it contain something too contentious to preserve? Every anomaly whispers the same question. What if the Bayeux Tapestry is less a chronicle and more a conversation, one where the needle and thread hold secrets the written record dared not speak? Who really dictated the story told by the Bayeux Tapestry? The threads of authorship are as tangled as the tapestry itself. For generations, the dominant theory pointed squarely to the Normans. After all, the narrative glorifies William's victory. Bishop Odo, William's ambitious half-brother, emerges as the most likely patron. His presence in key scenes, like rallying troops at Hastings, suggests personal involvement. Norman monasteries had the resources for such an elaborate project, and the Latin inscriptions align with their clerical traditions. But here's where it gets complicated. The artisans who painstakingly stitched this masterpiece were almost certainly English, trained in the distinctive Canterbury style of embroidery. Their needles may have been guided by Norman hands, but could their hearts have smuggled subversive details into the fabric? Then there's the radical theory that flips the script entirely. What if the tapestry was secretly commissioned by Anglo-Saxon survivors? Some scholars point to Harold's surprisingly dignified portrayal, his death scene echoing noble martyrs in religious art. The border's recurring themes of betrayal and fallen heroes resonate with English grief. Even the tapestry's location, initially displayed in Bayeux, a town with strong English ties before the conquest, hints at a possible audience of subdued locals needing covert comfort. And let's not overlook the peculiar gaps in Norman propaganda. Why show Harold's coronation as legitimate, or include his touching moment with a loyal soldier before battle? These aren't strokes of a victor's brush, but the most tantalizing possibility is that the tapestry served neither conqueror nor conquered, but a shadowy third party, the church. Medieval monasteries were power players, weaving politics into piety. The tapestry's moral undertones, oaths sworn on relics, divine punishment via comet, smack of ecclesiastical storytelling. Could it be a warning about the perils of broken vows disguised as history? Or consider the artisans themselves. Embroidery was often women's work, and convents like Barking Abbey were hubs of political influence. What if the tapestry's true authors were nuns, threading critiques of male violence into every stitch? Whoever held the needle, one thing is certain: the Bayeux Tapestry is no monologue. It's a chorus of voices, some shouting, some whispering, all preserved in wool and linen. And that's what makes it so extraordinary. This isn't just a record of who won a battle. It's a rare medieval moment where the silenced found a way to speak. The borders of the Bayeux Tapestry are far more than decorative flourishes. They're a hidden world teeming with silent storytellers. While the central panels shout the drama of conquest, the upper and lower margins hum with allegories, their animal actors performing a parallel tale. Lions, dragons, and griffins stalk the edges, their mythic forms borrowed from medieval bestiaries where every creature carried symbolic weight. A lion might represent nobility or resurrection, while a wolf could symbolize betrayal, exactly the themes simmering beneath the main narrative. Then there are the more puzzling figures, a fox being chased by a club-wielding man, a wolf howling at a crescent moon, even a mermaid cradling fish. These aren't random doodles. In an age where art was never frivolous, each motif feels like a carefully placed clue. Take the recurring fables woven into the borders. At one point, a crow perches on a branch, cheese in its beak, while a sly fox gazes upward, a direct nod to Aesop's fable about flattery and deception. The parallels to Harold's broken oath are almost too glaring to ignore. Elsewhere, farmers till soil or herd sheep, their peaceful labor contrasting sharply with the battle scenes above. Is this a subtle reminder that while kings clash, ordinary lives endure, or a quiet critique of the disruption wrought by power struggles? Even the grotesque figures, nude wrestlers, contorted acrobats, may have been moral warnings, medieval symbols of vice or folly mirroring the main story's political missteps. Then there's the tapestry's most haunting border dwellers, the half-seen observers. Ghostly faces peer from behind trees, shadowy hands reach into scenes as if manipulating events. One particularly eerie figure, a cloaked man with a walking stick, appears multiple times, watching Harold's journey like a silent chronicler. Some theorize he represents fate or divine judgment, a witness to the breaking of sacred oaths. Others suggest he's a nod to oral storytellers, the keepers of history who'd have recited such tales aloud while audiences traced the embroidered threads. Perhaps the most tantalizing theory links these margins to medieval embroidery traditions, where borders often contain the unofficial story commentary too dangerous to place front and center. In this reading, the Bayeux Tapestry's beasts and farm scenes aren't just decoration. They're the submerged text, the whispers of a world where conquest wasn't universally celebrated, where the needle could say what the tongue could not. Every creature, every plowed field becomes a stitch in a much richer, far more rebellious fabric. Those Aesop's fables stitched into the borders of the Bayeux Tapestry aren't just charming distractions, they're loaded with subtext, each animal and moral acting as a quiet rebellion against the grand narrative of conquest above them. Consider the crow and the fox, one of the most recognizable fables woven into the fabric. The scene shows the crow perched high, a piece of cheese clutched in its beak, while the fox below gazes up with flattering words. For medieval viewers, this wasn't just a children's tale. It was a cautionary allegory about deception, flattery, and the dangers of misplaced trust. Sound familiar? The parallels to Harold Godwinson's alleged oath to William are almost too perfect. A promise extracted under dubious circumstances followed by betrayal. Was this the embroiderer's way of suggesting Harold was the crow, tricked into surrendering his prize, or perhaps a sly critique of William as the fox, using cunning to claim what wasn't his? Then there's the fable of the wolf and the lamb, where a wolf fabricates excuses to justify attacking an innocent victim. In the tapestry's margins, a wolf stalks near scenes of Norman soldiers advancing, its presence a subtle indictment of manufactured justifications for war. Even the inclusion of farmers in the borders, men and women quietly tending crops while armies clash above, echoes Aesop's recurring themes of the powerless caught in the schemes of the powerful. These aren't random choices. Medieval audiences would have understood the layered meanings instantly, recognizing the fables as moral counterpoints to the main story's propaganda. But why Aesop? His fables were more than entertainment in the Middle Ages. They were political tools, a way to critique authority without direct confrontation. Monasteries and scholars circulated these stories as lessons in ethics, often using them to challenge the actions of kings and lords. By stitching them into the tapestry, the creators didn't just decorate the edges, they weaponized them. The fox's deceit, the wolf's cruelty, even the industrious ants working while others lazed, all would have resonated with an audience living under the aftermath of conquest. Every animal becomes a stand-in for the players in the Norman invasion, their fates mirroring the human drama unfolding in the central panels, the most striking part. These fables don't side neatly with victor or vanquished. Instead, they elevate universal truths about power and its abuses. a lion lounges atop a fallen stag, a reminder that might makes right. A donkey dressed in a lion's skin is chased off, a jab at pretenders and hollow authority. These images transcend the specifics of 1066, turning the tapestry into something timeless, a meditation on how rulers rise, how oaths are broken, and how the powerless navigate the fallout. The Normans may have won the battle, but in the borders, the embroiderers ensured the moral victory was far less certain. Amid the sprawling battle scenes and political intrigue of the Bayeux Tapestry, one figure stands out not for her grandeur, but for her mystery, a woman labeled simply Aelfgyva. She appears in a single panel, dressed in elegant robes, her face turned toward a tonsured cleric who leans in as if whispering a secret. Above them, the cryptic Latin inscription reads, "Where a cleric and Aelfgyva." The sentence trails off, deliberately incomplete, as if the tapestry itself is guarding her story. Who was this woman, and why does her fleeting presence feel so charged with meaning? Theories about Aelfgyva's identity range from the plausible to the tantalizingly speculative. Some historians suggest she might be Aelfgyva of Northampton, a politically powerful Anglo-Saxon noblewoman whose tumultuous life intersected with both English and Norman royalty. Aelfgyva was the first wife of King Cnut, mother to his heirs, and later entangled in scandals that saw her exiled. If this is her, the whispering cleric could hint at the rumors that dogged her, accusations of adultery, and even forging her son's legitimacy. Alternatively, she might represent Aelfgyva of Normandy, a shadowy figure linked to Duke William's family, her inclusion a nod to dynastic alliances or disputes lost to time. Others propose even bolder interpretations. Could Aelfgyva symbolize the church itself, her interaction with the cleric a metaphor for the tangled relationship between spiritual authority and political power? The way her hand hovers near the cleric's face suggests intimacy or conspiracy, fueling speculation that this scene critiques corruption or covert influence. Then there's the most provocative theory that Aelfgyva embodies England itself, a silent female figure caught between the promises of clergy and crown, her unfinished story mirroring the nation's uncertain fate post-conquest. What makes this scene particularly eerie is its abruptness. Unlike other panels which flow logically into the next, Aelfgyva's moment feels inserted, almost jarring. The cleric's gesture, a finger raised to his lips, could signal secrecy, warning, or even censorship. And why leave the inscription incomplete? Was the rest too dangerous to stitch? Or was the ambiguity itself the point, a deliberate gap for viewers to fill with their own suspicions? The tapestry's borders offer no clarity, but they amplify the tension. Directly below Aelfgyva, a naked man crouches in the lower margin, his body twisted in a pose that medieval audiences would have recognized as a symbol of shame or exposure. Above her, a bird of prey swoops toward smaller fowl, a motif often tied to predation or divine judgment. These visual echoes transform her from a passive figure into a focal point of hidden narratives, her presence a question mark stitched in thread. Aelfgyva's mystery endures because it refuses resolution. She might be a historical person, a symbolic stand-in, or even an inside joke among the embroiderers. But her power lies in the silence she imposes. In a tapestry that shouts of battles and oaths, she is a whisper, one that reminds us how much of history is shaped not just by the voices that dominate, but by those that linger half-heard in the margins. Halley's comet streaks across the Bayeux Tapestry like a celestial exclamation point, a blazing omen stitched in jagged threads of white and gold, hovering ominously above Harold Godwinson's crowned head. The Latin caption declares its arrival plainly. These men marvel at the star, but this isn't just a record of an astronomical event. It's a calculated narrative device pulsing with political energy. To medieval eyes, comets weren't mere curiosities. They were divine portents, heralds of upheaval and divine judgment. So when the tapestry positions the comet directly over Harold's reign, the message is unmistakable. his kingship was doomed from the start, marked by the heavens themselves. Yet peel back the layers and this divine sign starts to look suspiciously like propaganda, a masterstroke of psychological warfare woven into fabric. The historical record confirms Halley's comet did appear in April of 1066, its fiery tail visible for weeks, but the tapestry's depiction is anything but neutral. Notice how the English court recoils in terror, their faces upturned in dread, while on the far side of the panel, a shadowy messenger sprints toward Normandy, an unverified detail that transforms the comet from a natural phenomenon into William's personal celestial endorsement. The Normans weren't just documenting history, they were scripting it, using needle and thread to imply God had taken sides. This wasn't subtle. In an era where rulers derived authority from divine favor, linking your rival's reign to a harbinger of disaster was political dynamite. But here's where it gets murky. Some scholars argue the comet scene might have been added later, stitched over existing fabric to amplify William's legitimacy after the fact. The comet's position disrupts the visual flow, crammed awkwardly between Harold's coronation and the ominous ship building below. Even the stitching technique differs slightly, with the comet's tail using a rarer chain stitch not seen elsewhere. Could this be evidence of a medieval edit, a hasty embellishment to cement the Norman narrative? Then there's the matter of perspective. The tapestry shows the comet as a streaking fireball, but Halley's comet would have appeared as a diffuse smudge to the naked eye. The dramatic rendering feels less like observation and more like artistic license or outright manipulation. Compare this to contemporary Anglo-Saxon chronicles, where the comet is noted calmly without apocalyptic fanfare. The contrast is stark. One culture saw an astronomical event, the other spun it into a weapon. Perhaps most telling is what the tapestry omits. Nowhere does it mention that comets were considered bad omens for all rulers, not just Harold. By medieval logic, the comet could just as easily have foreshadowed William's own hardships, yet the tapestry silences that interpretation. This selective storytelling reveals the comet's true purpose, not as a neutral record, but as a threaded argument, a way to retroactively justify invasion as cosmic inevitability. And so the comet hangs there, frozen in linen and wool, a testament to the power of imagery in shaping history. Whether divine sign or deft propaganda, its brilliance on the tapestry outshines even its real-life counterpart. For centuries, viewers have looked up at those embroidered threads and seen not just a comet but a verdict, proof that the needle can be as persuasive as the sword. The Bayeux Tapestry's grand narrative of conquest and destiny doesn't end with a coronation or a triumphant parade. It stops mid-chaos, with English soldiers fleeing beneath a tangle of severed limbs and broken weapons. This abrupt finale has haunted historians for centuries. The original last panels are missing, their absence as conspicuous as a missing page from a thriller's final chapter. Was this damage accidental, the result of 9 centuries of wear and tear, or does the gap hide something more deliberate, a calculated act of historical censorship? Consider the tapestry's final surviving scene, Norman cavalry trampling fallen Anglo-Saxons, their bodies contorted in agony, while the borders swirl with Aesopian beasts as if mocking the carnage. It's a far cry from the orderly propaganda we'd expect. Most medieval victory art culminates in divine coronations or peaceful reigns, yet here, the threadbare ending lingers on violence without resolution. Even the Latin inscriptions, usually so precise, taper off into silence. This isn't just artistic license, it feels like an interruption. Theories about the missing panels range from the practical to the provocative. Some argue the end simply frayed away over time, worn thin by handling or sunlight, but tapestry experts point out that the surviving edges show no signs of natural deterioration. They're clean cut, as if trimmed by scissors. Others suggest the final section depicted William's coronation, a scene so standard for Norman art that its absence feels intentional. Perhaps it was removed during political upheavals like the French Revolution, when royal imagery was systematically destroyed. But the most tantalizing possibility, the lost panels contained something too subversive to preserve. Imagine a scene where William's victory is undercut, perhaps by English resistance continuing, or by the conqueror himself shown in a compromising light. Medieval art was never shy about portraying rulers' flaws when regimes changed. Could the missing fabric have shown rebellions like the harrying of the North, where William's brutal tactics turned even Norman stomachs? Or might it have featured Odo's later fall from grace, imprisoned by his own half-brother for overreach? The tapestry's existing content doesn't shy from ambiguity. Harold's death, Aelfgyva's mystery, so why would its ending be sanitized unless it challenged the official story too boldly? Even the tapestry's display history hints at secrecy. For centuries, it was rolled up and shown selectively in Bayeux Cathedral, its full narrative likely unseen by most. The first complete sketches in the 18th century already show the current abrupt ending, suggesting the loss occurred early, possibly to hide content that later powers found inconvenient. What remains is a masterpiece that feels eerily unfinished, its last threads dangling like an unanswered question. In that sense, perhaps the tapestry's incomplete state is fitting, a reminder that history is never truly concluded, only edited by those who hold the needle. The moment Harold Godwinson falls at Hastings is the tapestry's most iconic scene, yet it's also its most debated. Look closely, and you'll see not one but two arrows near the English king, one grazing his cheek, another piercing his eye. His body crumples beneath a Norman knight's sword blow, the caption bluntly stating, "Here King Harold is killed," but this seemingly straightforward depiction unravels under scrutiny. Historical accounts from the time, like the Chronicle of William of Poitiers, claim Harold was brutally dismembered by knights, his body so mangled only his mistress could identify it by secret marks. So why does the tapestry show a comparatively dignified death, with Harold's face intact and only two arrows marking his fall? The discrepancy sparks a striking theory. What if the Bayeux Tapestry's creators deliberately blurred Harold's fate to serve multiple narratives? To the Normans, the arrow in the eye reinforced divine punishment. Medieval symbolism treated eyes as windows to the soul. A wound there suggested moral blindness, a fitting end for an oath breaker. But to English viewers, Harold's posture kneeling, almost prayerful, echoed depictions of martyred saints. Even the second arrow, often overlooked, might be significant. Some scholars suggest it was added later, literally stitching over an original scene where Harold was shown fighting valiantly, sword in hand. Infrared scans reveal faint traces of erased stitches beneath the arrows, hinting at a possible revision. The tapestry's ambiguities don't stop there. In earlier scenes, Harold is portrayed with surprising nuance, rescuing soldiers from quicksand, receiving the crown from a dying Edward the Confessor. His death scene mirrors these earlier moments of nobility, his body framed like fallen heroes in religious art. Compare this to Norman accounts, where Harold is a usurper whose corpse is denied Christian burial. The contrast is stark. Written history vilifies him, but the needlework allows for pity, even respect. Perhaps the most compelling clue lies in the margins. Directly below Harold's death, the border shows a wolf howling at a crescent moon, a medieval symbol of betrayal and coming darkness. Above him, a serpent coils near the word Harold, as if hissing his name. These aren't random embellishments, they're visual commentary, amplifying the scene's tension between condemnation and commemoration. So was Harold a treacherous oath-breaker struck down by God's will, or a tragic last Saxon king betrayed by fate? The tapestry refuses to say outright. Instead, it threads the needle between victor and vanquished, leaving room for both stories to coexist in the same fabric. In this light, the dual arrows aren't a mistake, they're the point. One for the Normans' version, one for the English, and the space between them where history's true complexity lies. Buried within the Bayeux Tapestry's vivid scenes and cryptic borders lies a lesser-known layer of potential meaning, one that doesn't rely on symbols or allegories, but on the very fabric of its construction. Take a step back and you'll notice the tapestry isn't just a random assortment of stitches. Its design is meticulously ordered, with patterns that hint at a numerical code woven into the work itself. Could the embroiderers have used stitch counts, figure groupings, and proportional layouts as a clandestine messaging system? The idea isn't as far-fetched as it might seem. Medieval artisans often embedded numerical symbolism into their works, treating numbers as sacred vessels of hidden knowledge. Start with the figures themselves. The tapestry features 626 human characters, a number that aligns suspiciously well with significant dates and biblical numerology. 626 echoes the year 626, when the Battle of Nineveh reshaped the Middle East, a conflict some scholars believe medieval chroniclers saw as a parallel to Hastings. Even more intriguing, 626 is just one short of 627, the year Islam's prophet Muhammad began receiving revelations. Was this a subtle nod to divine intervention in human conflicts, or merely coincidence? The tapestry's animal count deepens the mystery. 192 beasts crowd the borders, a number that mirrors the gematria value of certain Hebrew phrases associated with destiny and judgment. Then there's the spacing. Scenes are divided into 53 distinct panels, but the divisions aren't arbitrary. Key moments: Harold's oath, the comet's appearance, his death fall at precise intervals, each separated by stitch counts divisible by 7, a number laden with medieval religious significance. 7 days of creation, 7 virtues, 7 deadly sins. The tapestry's structural rhythm seems to pulse with this sacred cadence. Even the empty spaces speak volumes. Between major events, the embroiderers left oddly consistent gaps: 11 centimeters of blank linen, a measurement that corresponds to the width of medieval prayer scrolls. Were these pauses visual punctuation or something more deliberate? Look closer at the battle scenes and another numerical pattern emerges. Norman cavalry charges are depicted in groups of 14, a number associated in medieval texts with rebellion and divine retribution. English shield walls, meanwhile, cluster in 11s, a possible reference to the 11 faithful apostles after Judah's betrayal, framing the English as martyrs to a sacred cause. Even the comet's tail stretches exactly 72 stitches long, a number that appears in apocalyptic texts as the count of nations doomed to fall. But the most compelling evidence might be in the stitches themselves. Detailed examinations reveal certain color threads recur at measurable intervals: every 9th blue stitch, every 5th green, creating a subtle rhythm that echoes the mnemonic devices used in oral storytelling. Could these sequences be markers for a lost verbal tradition, guiding a medieval narrator through the tapestry's hidden subtext? Or do they trace a path to something even more startling, like the rumored secret inventory of English treasures looted by the Normans, a record too dangerous to write but perhaps safe to encode in thread? The numerical patterns resist easy interpretation, and that's precisely what makes them so fascinating. Unlike the tapestry's overt imagery, these hidden rhythms don't declare allegiance to Norman or English perspectives. Instead, they hum beneath the surface, a mathematical undercurrent that transforms the work from mere propaganda into something far more enigmatic, a fabric where every stitch might be a syllable in a whispered prayer, a coordinate on a spiritual map, or a ticking clock counting down to divine judgment. Whether intentional or instinctive, these numerical choices remind us that medieval artists didn't just create, they calculated, measured, and perhaps even prophesied with needle and thread. In medieval Europe, textiles weren't just practical, they were political. Unlike stone carvings or illuminated manuscripts, which required the resources of the powerful, fabric was a uniquely democratic medium. It could be folded, hidden, or displayed selectively, carrying messages that might otherwise be dangerous to speak aloud. Consider the famous Chanson de Roland embroideries, stitched by noblewomen to celebrate Charlemagne's victories, yet subtly altered in convent workshops to mourn the cost of war. Or the Flemish tapestries that wove biblical scenes with local landscapes, turning divine stories into quiet critiques of feudal oppression. Cloth was malleable, both literally and figuratively, a space where dissent could be disguised as decoration. This tradition of textile subversion makes the Bayeux Tapestry's medium as meaningful as its message. Embroidery was often women's work, a fact that adds another layer to its potential hidden narratives. While monks chronicled history in Latin for elite audiences, needleworkers, many anonymous, stitched their perspectives into the very fabric of daily life. The Canterbury embroidery schools, where the Bayeux Tapestry was likely crafted, were renowned for their opus Anglicanum, a style so exquisite it was gifted to popes. But beneath the gold thread lay clever symbolism. Foxes chasing hares in liturgical vestments hinted at clerical corruption. Unicorns in royal tapestries whispered of purity lost. Even the tapestry's physical construction suggests coded intent. Medieval textiles frequently used color as language: red for martyrdom, green for rebirth, blue for divine truth. The Bayeux Tapestry's palette is dominated by earthy terracottas and deep indigos, but flashes of unexpected gold and sage green draw the eye to key moments: Halley's comet, Harold's coronation, the mysterious Aelfgyva. Were these highlights mere aesthetic choices or visual signposts for those who knew how to read them? Perhaps most telling is how textiles traveled. Unlike static frescoes, tapestries were portable, displayed in castles one month and churches the next, their stories adapting to different audiences. The Bayeux Tapestry's first known exhibition was in Bayeux Cathedral, a space frequented by both Norman elites and Anglo-Saxon locals. Imagine the whispers as English parishioners recognized their own embroidery styles in the borders or spotted Harold's oddly heroic poses. In an age where few could read, thread became text and every stitch a potential act of quiet defiance. This context transforms how we see the tapestry. It's no longer just a chronicle of conquest, but part of a broader tradition where fabric was the parchment of the powerless. From the Bayeux to the Apocalypse tapestry of Angers, medieval textiles didn't just depict history, they contested it, one careful stitch at a time. The Bayeux Tapestry's survival through 9 centuries of war, revolution, and neglect feels less like luck and more like a miracle threaded with intention. Consider the odds: medieval embroidery, even of this caliber, was never meant to last. Most textiles from this era have crumbled to dust, victims of moths, moisture, or mere indifference. Yet here it is, a 70-meter-long linen canvas, its woolen stitches still vibrantly telling a story that should have frayed away long ago. So how did this fragile masterpiece defy time? The answer might lie in a combination of sheer historical accident and something far more deliberate: a quiet conspiracy of preservation. Start with the tapestry's physical journey. For centuries, it was rolled up and stored in Bayeux Cathedral, shielded from light and handled sparingly. But this wasn't just careful housekeeping. The cathedral, founded by Bishop Odo, the very man likely behind the tapestry's creation, had a vested interest in safeguarding William the Conqueror's legacy. Yet the tapestry's survival hints at more than Norman pride. During the French Revolution, when mobs destroyed countless relics of the old regime, the tapestry was nearly cut into strips to cover supply wagons. At the last moment, a local lawyer intervened, arguing it held artistic value. Was this a stroke of luck, or did someone recognize its deeper significance? Then there's the tapestry's material resilience. The linen backing, woven with extraordinary density, resisted tearing. The wool threads, dyed with iron-rich mordants, chemically bonded to the fabric, making colors fade slower than typical medieval dyes. Even the stitching technique, a combination of laid and couched work, created a surface flexible enough to endure rolling and unrolling without cracking. These aren't happy accidents, they're hallmarks of craftsmanship engineered for longevity. But the most compelling evidence of intentional preservation lies in the tapestry's shifting ownership. After the revolution, Napoleon seized it for propaganda, displaying it in Paris to stoke anti-English sentiment before his planned invasion. Later, Nazi officials meticulously studied it during World War II, seeing it as a blueprint for their own cross-channel conquest. Each era's powerful men seemed to project their ambitions onto the fabric, ensuring its safekeeping not for art's sake, but as a tool. Perhaps the tapestry endured precisely because it was never just art. It was a relic, a trophy, a warning, and a cipher, its value shifting with the tides of power. Every hand that protected it, from medieval bishops to revolutionary scholars, may have thought they were preserving history. In truth, they were keeping alive a conversation, one that began with a needle and thread and refuses to end. Monasteries in the 11th century weren't just quiet houses of prayer. They were power players, weaving faith and politics into every illuminated manuscript and embroidered banner. So when we examine the Bayeux Tapestry's potential monastic origins, a startling possibility emerges. What if the very institutions tasked with preserving history subtly rewrote it? Canterbury's Christ Church Monastery, a likely production site for the tapestry, was no stranger to political intrigue. Just years after the Norman Conquest, its Anglo-Saxon abbot was forcibly replaced by a Norman appointee, and its scriptorium became a battleground for competing historical narratives. In this light, the tapestry's anomalies start to look less like artistic choices and more like deliberate edits, stitches in a clerical conspiracy. Take the tapestry's portrayal of Bishop Odo, William's half-brother. He appears prominently, rallying troops at Hastings, yet his later disgrace, imprisoned by William for overreaching ambition, is conspicuously absent. This omission feels suspiciously convenient. Monasteries under Norman control had every reason to sanitize Odo's image while he was still powerful, only to lose subsequent panels when he fell from favor. Even the Latin inscriptions, likely penned by monastic scribes, carry echoes of ecclesiastical rhetoric. Phrases like, "Here Duke William crosses the sea," mirror liturgical language, framing the invasion as divinely ordained. But beneath this surface piety, the needlework tells a subtler tale. The English artisans, many trained in monastic embroidery workshops, would have known how to layer meaning into every stitch. Then there's the matter of selective preservation. The tapestry's survival hinges on Bayeux Cathedral, a monastic stronghold with direct ties to Odo. Why was this singular textile, out of countless others, so meticulously safeguarded? Compare it to the Carmen de Hastings Prolio, a contemporary poem glorifying William's victory. Unlike the tapestry, the Carmen survives only in later copies, its original likely discarded once its propaganda value faded. The tapestry, by contrast, was treated as a relic, hinting that its custodians saw it as more than a celebration of conquest. Perhaps they recognized its dual nature, a surface narrative for Norman lords and a buried one for those who knew how to read between the threads. Most revealing are the monastic practices of the era. Canterbury's scribes were experts in palimpsests, scraping away old texts to write new ones over them. Infrared scans of the tapestry show similar overwriting, faint traces of earlier stitching beneath key scenes like Harold's death. Was this a textile palimpsest where monastic hands revised history as regimes changed? Even the borders, crammed with fables and farming scenes, mirror the marginalia in illuminated manuscripts where monks often hid subversive commentary. A wolf in sheep's clothing here, a fox duping a crow there. These weren't just decorations, they were monastic signatures, a way to say, look closer. The monasteries had the means, the motive, and the skill to turn the Bayeux Tapestry into a layered document. Whether to curry favor with Norman patrons, protect English sympathies, or simply record truth in a time of enforced silence, their influence lingers in every suspicious omission, every loaded symbol. In an age where the church controlled the written word, perhaps thread became their most powerful ink. To truly understand the Bayeux Tapestry's hidden messages, we need to place it alongside other surviving accounts of the Norman Conquest, and the differences are staggering. Take the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, England's most authoritative historical record at the time. While the tapestry portrays Harold Godwinson's coronation as legitimate, the Chronicle goes further, describing how Edward the Confessor named Harold his heir on his deathbed. There's no mention of any broken oath to William in these English annals, just a smooth succession. Yet in the tapestry, Harold's pledge to William is the linchpin of the entire narrative, stitched with dramatic flair. Someone's lying, or at least someone's spinning the truth. The discrepancies don't end there. The tapestry's depiction of the Battle of Hastings is a masterclass in controlled storytelling. Orderly Norman cavalry charges, Harold's dramatic arrow-to-the-eye demise. Compare this to the Chronicle's raw, unfiltered account, a chaotic melee where Harold's elite housecarls fight to the last man, their axes cleaving through Norman helmets until they're literally hacking at tree stumps for lack of enemies left standing. The tapestry shows a single, decisive moment of Harold's death. The Chronicle implies he was butchered beyond recognition, his body pieced together for burial by grieving kin. Which version feels more like propaganda? Then there's the matter of perspective. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle mourns. Its entries for 1066 read like a lament. Earl Harold was slain, and the Frenchmen held the place of slaughter. The tapestry, by contrast, thrums with inevitability, every scene building toward William's triumph as divine will. Even small details diverge. The Chronicle notes English forces were exhausted from fighting off a Viking invasion just weeks before Hastings, while the tapestry skips this entirely, framing the Normans as conquering a fresh, arrogant foe. Most telling are the silences. Nowhere does the tapestry mention the harrying of the North, William's brutal campaign that razed entire English villages. Yet the Chronicle documents it in harrowing detail. Crops burned, civilians starved, the land left one great wilderness. For Norman patrons, this genocide was likely too damning to embroider. But the Chronicle, compiled by monks who witnessed the aftermath, refused to let history forget. Even William's contemporaries couldn't agree. Norman chronicler William of Poitiers paints Hastings as a glorious crusade, while the French monk Orderic Vitalis, writing decades later, admits the conquest was stained with blood. Only the tapestry tries to have it both ways, a surface celebration of victory, threaded with whispers of doubt. In the end, these conflicting accounts don't just highlight bias, they prove history is always a battleground. The victors may write the first draft, but the needle, the pen, and the stubborn memory of the defeated keep sowing counter-narratives. Hidden beneath the Bayeux Tapestry's battle scenes and royal drama, a rich undercurrent of medieval folklore pulses through every embroidered border and marginal vignette. These aren't mere decorations, they're fragments of a symbolic language, stitched into the fabric for those who knew how to read them. Take the recurring fables woven alongside historical events, the cunning fox outwitting the crow, the wolf disguising itself among sheep, the industrious ant storing food while the grasshopper starves. To the untrained eye, they might seem like whimsical distractions, but to medieval viewers steeped in oral traditions, these animal tales were moral mirrors reflecting the main narrative's hidden truths. The tapestry's creators didn't just borrow from Aesop, they tapped into a deeper well of folk symbolism. Notice how certain creatures appear at pivotal moments. A wolf howls at the moon just as Harold takes the crown, a medieval omen of impending doom. A lion, often representing resurrection, lounges near William's fleet as if foreshadowing his triumphant rise. Even the fantastical hybrids, griffins, mermaids, and winged serpents carried specific meanings in 11th century bestiaries. These weren't random choices, they formed a parallel narrative accessible only to those versed in the allegories of the time. Oral traditions amplify this coded storytelling. medieval embroiderers, often women trained in monastic scriptoria or noble households, would have been steeped in the same folk tales sung by bards and whispered in hearthside gatherings. The tapestry's visual rhythms, repeated motifs, strategic color shifts, even the spacing between figures echo the cadences of sung epics or recited poetry. Some scholars argue the borders function like a chorus in Greek tragedy, commenting on the action through symbolic asides. A farmer plowing his field beneath a cavalry charge isn't just filling space, he's embodying the folk wisdom that kings come and go, but the earth remains. Perhaps most telling are the scenes that defy historical record but align perfectly with folklore tropes. The mysterious naked man in the margins beneath Aelfgyva's panel mirrors medieval folk tales about truth being exposed in dreams. Halley's comet, rendered as a celestial dragon, echoes Norse and Anglo-Saxon myths where fiery sky serpents heralded the fall of kings. Even the puzzling lack of a clear villain, Harold is flawed but not demonized, William victorious but not sanctified, reflects the nuanced morality of oral storytelling, where heroes and villains were rarely absolute. This folkloric layer transforms the tapestry from a mere chronicle into something more potent, a mnemonic device designed to trigger shared cultural memories. Like the rune stones of Scandinavia or the carved misericords of Gothic cathedrals, it speaks in a visual dialect meant to be read aloud by guides, whether monks, storytellers, or even the embroiderers themselves. The stitches preserve not just events, but the living voice of a people who understood history not as dry facts, but as a tapestry of myth, warning, and collective memory. In this light, the Bayeux Tapestry becomes a bridge between worlds, the official history of crowns and conquests above, and the enduring whisper of folk wisdom below. Its power lies in duality, a document that could glorify a conqueror to his face, even as its threads quietly hum the older, darker songs of the conquered. The scene where Harold Godwinson kneels before William of Normandy, his hands pressed to holy relics as he swears an oath of allegiance, is the tapestry's narrative pivot, the moment that transforms William from rival to rightful claimant. But what if this iconic moment isn't history at all? What if it's a masterful stitch of Norman propaganda designed to retroactively justify an invasion that was, at its core, a naked power grab? Look closer at the details. Harold's posture in the tapestry is anything but resolute, his body hunched, his face turned slightly away, as if recoiling from the relics beneath his palms. The Latin caption is direct, where Harold made an oath to Duke William. Yet no contemporary English source mentions this oath. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle, our most reliable record from Harold's side, describes his succession as smooth and divinely sanctioned, with dying King Edward the Confessor naming Harold his heir. Even Norman chronicles like William of Poitiers' Gesta Guilhelmi are suspiciously vague about the oath's specifics, focusing instead on its alleged violation. The relics themselves raise red flags. Medieval oaths sworn on sacred objects, bones of saints, fragments of the true cross, were binding, their violation tantamount to defying God. But the tapestry doesn't name which relics Harold touched, an omission that would have struck medieval audiences as glaring. In an era where documenting sacred vows was meticulous, this vagueness feels deliberate, as if the creators knew they were embellishing. Then there's the timing. The tapestry places the oath during Harold's trip to Normandy, likely around 1064, but Norman sources can't agree whether this visit was voluntary or coerced. Some claim Harold was shipwrecked and rescued by William, a convenient kidnapping dressed as hospitality. Others suggest he was negotiating the release of family members held hostage. Either scenario undermines the oath's legitimacy. Can a promise made under duress, surrounded by armed men in a foreign court, truly be binding? The tapestry sidesteps these questions, presenting the moment as solemn and mutual. Most damning is the tapestry's own visual ambiguity. In the margins flanking the oath scene, shadowy figures lurk, a crouching archer with an unstrung bow, a man gripping a club, even a pair of disembodied hands reaching toward the relics. These could be mere decorative flourishes, but in a work where every stitch carries meaning, they feel like silent witnesses to coercion. Compare this to the Carmen de Hastings Prolio, a Norman poem that outright states Harold swore the oath out of fear, his hand trembling over the relics. The tapestry, ever diplomatic, leaves the tension unspoken but stitched. Even the oath's narrative purpose is suspect. By framing Harold as an oath-breaker, the Normans tapped into a potent medieval fear, divine retribution for perjury. This wasn't just politics, it was theological warfare. William's invasion could then be framed as a holy mission, a correction of cosmic disorder. The tapestry drives this home by following the oath with Halley's Comet, a celestial indictment of Harold's betrayal. Yet English sources paint Harold's coronation as joyous, the comet an unrelated omen. The dissonance is stark. One culture's legitimate king is another's perjured usurper, and the tapestry sits squarely in the Norman camp. Perhaps the most telling clue lies in embroidery itself. Infrared examinations reveal subtle alterations around Harold's hands, faint traces of earlier stitching suggesting his posture was adjusted to appear more submissive. Was the original scene less dramatic, edited later to heighten the oath's significance? Or was this always fiction, stitched into history's fabric to legitimize a conquest that needed all the justification it could muster? The oath scene's power isn't in its truth, but in its necessity. For William to be more than a usurper, Harold had to be less than a king. The tapestry, with its luminous threads and careful omissions, doesn't just tell a story. It builds a myth, one where broken promises demand divine intervention. An invasion isn't theft, but justice. The real question isn't whether Harold swore that oath. It's why, 9 centuries later, we still see history through the conqueror's needle. Among the armored knights and scheming clerics of the Bayeux Tapestry, the women stand quietly, but their presence speaks volumes. Take the mysterious Aelfgyva, her name stitched conspicuously above her veiled head as she converses with a whispering cleric. While the men dominate the battlefield scenes, figures like her occupy liminal spaces, their roles ambiguous yet charged with meaning. In an era when chronicles erased women's voices, the tapestry's needlework may have smuggled their stories into history's margins. Consider the tapestry's lone named woman alongside its anonymous female figures, mourners hovering over Edward the Confessor's deathbed, a distraught woman fleeing a burning house during the Hastings invasion. Their placement is never accidental. The woman with flowing hair clutching a child near the comet scene mirrors medieval depictions of the Virgin Mary witnessing omens, subtly casting England as an afflicted mother figure. Even the weaving process itself whispers of female influence. While Bishop Odo may have commissioned the work, the hands that stitched it were likely those of English embroiderers, many trained in monastic workshops where women controlled the narrative thread. The real subversion lies in what these images omit. Norman propaganda celebrated William's wife Matilda as the ideal conquering queen, yet she's conspicuously absent from the tapestry. Instead, we see English women in moments of vulnerability or wisdom, a deliberate choice that undermines Norman claims of civilized superiority. Look closer at the borders and the symbolism deepens. A female centaur drawing a bow appears near Harold's coronation, a hybrid creature symbolizing untamed feminine power in medieval bestiaries. Nearby, a mermaid cradling fish evokes ancient fertility motifs, perhaps a silent nod to the land William seized being personified as a woman violated. These aren't decorative afterthoughts. Medieval textiles often served as covert feminist texts. Think of the Apocalypse tapestry's weaving women symbolizing divine knowledge, or the Bayeux's own probable use of opus anglicanum, a technique perfected by English nuns. When the tapestry shows a noblewoman presenting a sword to a warrior, a scene some interpret as Harold's sister gifting weapons, it echoes real 11th century accounts of Anglo-Saxon women arming resistance fighters. Perhaps most revealing is how the tapestry handles female-coded spaces. While men clash on battlefields, women govern interiors. Edward's deathbed becomes a chamber of transition. Harold's oath scene unfolds near a domestic archway. Even the comet's appearance is witnessed by courtiers gathered indoors, a subtle reminder that while men waged war, women preserved the cultural memory of what was lost. The needle becomes their pen, the linen their parchment, stitching counter-narratives into the conqueror's triumphal cloth. By the time we reach the invasion's aftermath, a woman fleeing with her child as buildings burn, the message is inescapable. These threads don't just depict history, they mourn it, preserving voices that official records silenced. The real power of the Bayeux Tapestry may not be in its celebration of victory, but in the spaces between stitches where the defeated, especially women, found ways to say, "We were here." Modern technology has peeled back centuries of dust and wear on the Bayeux Tapestry, revealing secrets its creators never imagined would resurface. Ultraviolet imaging, for instance, has exposed faded pigments once invisible to the naked eye, ghostly traces of colors that transform the tapestry's narrative. Where today's viewers see muted tans and browns, UV scans show vibrant blues and greens, suggesting a far more visually striking original. The comet that heralds Harold's doom, for example, once blazed electric yellow against a lapis sky, making its ominous message even more visceral. Spectral analysis takes this further, identifying organic dyes long since degraded like the rare shellfish purple reserved for royalty in Harold's robes, a detail that subtly reinforces his legitimacy even as the narrative condemns him. Artificial intelligence has become the newest needle threading through the tapestry's mysteries. Machine learning algorithms trained on medieval stitching patterns have detected subtle inconsistencies in thread density, flagging areas where embroiderers might have altered their work. One compelling find, the arrow piercing Harold's eye, shows signs of being stitched over an earlier scene, likely a sword strike to his thigh, a wound described in Norman chronicles but absent from the tapestry until now. These digital tools also map the embroidery's handwriting, distinguishing between individual artisans by analyzing stitch angles and tension. The results suggest at least 6 different embroiderers worked on the tapestry, their techniques varying distinctly, some favoring tight, precise knots for battle scenes, others using looser threads for symbolic borders, as if separating fact from commentary. Even the linen canvas itself has secrets to surrender. Hyperspectral imaging, which captures light beyond the visible spectrum, uncovered faint charcoal sketches beneath the wool medieval pencil lines guiding the embroiderers. In one startling revelation, these underdrawings show a discarded scene of English villagers resisting Norman soldiers, later covered by a more neutral farmland vignette. Was this a rejected narrative of rebellion whitewashed by Norman patrons, or an embroiderer's private protest quietly stitched over but not erased? The tapestry's physical structure, examined through microscopic scans, reveals another surprise: repairs done within decades of its creation, as if someone hastily altered contentious sections while the events were still within living memory. Perhaps most haunting are the invisible narratives emerging from AI-powered text analysis. By cross-referencing the Latin inscriptions with thousands of medieval manuscripts, researchers noticed eerie gaps, phrases that align less with Norman propaganda and more with English elegiac poetry. The description of Harold's death, for instance, shares syntax with Old English laments for fallen heroes, suggesting the scribe might have been bilingual, weaving Anglo-Saxon grief into the conqueror's triumph. Even the spacing between words holds clues. Erratic gaps near key names hint at last-minute edits, as if the text itself was a battlefield where meanings clashed and compromised. These technological revelations don't just add detail, they rewrite the tapestry's biography. What we see today is a palimpsest of revisions, a work constantly negotiating between conqueror and conquered, between the story told and the one silenced. The stitches glow differently under UV light, the ink whispers under AI scrutiny, and the linen breathes beneath spectral scans. After 9 centuries, the Bayeux Tapestry is finally speaking in voices we're just beginning to hear. The Bayeux Tapestry's journey through time hasn't been without interference specifically, the heavy-handed restorations of the 19th century that may have irrevocably altered its original message. In the 1800s, the tapestry was treated less like a priceless historical artifact and more like a damaged heirloom in need of sprucing up. The most extensive repairs took place under the direction of nuns from a Bayeux convent, who diligently re-stitched faded sections but also introduced their own interpretations into the fabric. Infrared imaging and thread analysis reveal startling discrepancies, entire scenes touched up with 19th century wool, motifs subtly reshaped, even faces and expressions adjusted to fit Victorian sensibilities. One of the most contentious alterations centers on Harold Godwinson's death. The iconic image of him clutching the arrow in his eye, a scene burned into popular memory, may not be original. Early sketches made before the restorations depict Harold struck by a sword, not an arrow, aligning with Norman chronicles that describe him being hacked apart by knights. The arrow, it seems, was a later addition, possibly stitched in to amplify the narrative of divine punishment. After all, an arrow through the eye carried biblical symbolism of retribution for oath-breaking. Even the stitches themselves betray the intervention. The wool used in Harold's eye wound matches dyes from the 1800s, not the medieval palette found elsewhere in the tapestry. Then there's the mysterious case of the border figures. Many of the grotesque creatures and fables we see today, the sly foxes, the wrestling nudes, were heavily reinforced or even entirely re-embroidered during restoration. Some scholars argue these embellishments exaggerated the moralistic tone, turning subtle allegories into blunt moral lessons. A particularly telling example is the Aesop's fable of the crow and the fox. Pre-restoration drawings show a simpler scene, but the 19th century version adds dramatic flair. The fox's grin more pronounced, the crow's wings splayed in exaggerated distress. Was this artistic license or a deliberate effort to make the tapestry's subtext louder? Even the Latin inscriptions weren't spared. Close examination shows sections where faded letters were re-stitched with slight deviations, words like perfidia, treachery emphasized with thicker thread, while more neutral terms were left to fade. The most glaring alteration, the selective reinforcement of Bishop Odo's name in battle scenes, making him more prominent than the original embroidery suggested. A change that conveniently aligned with 19th century France's renewed interest in Norman heroism during a wave of nationalist sentiment. The controversy deepens when we consider what might have been lost. Some historians suspect entire panels were tidied up beyond recognition, their original imagery smoothed over to fit a cleaner, more palatable narrative. A faint outline beneath one restored section hints at a possible scene of English resistance villagers fighting back against Norman soldiers, later covered by a benign farming vignette. If true, this erasure would have silenced one of the tapestry's most rebellious whispers. What makes these restorations so troubling isn't just the physical changes, it's the ideological ones. The 19th century was an era obsessed with grand narratives of conquest and destiny, and the tapestry's refreshed version reflects that world far more than the messy, ambiguous original ever did. The nuns who repaired it weren't just darning fabric, they were editing history, threading their own biases into a medieval masterpiece. Today, as technology peels back their interventions, we're left with a haunting question. How much of the Bayeux Tapestry story still belongs to the 11th century, and how much was rewritten by the needles of the 19th? While mainstream scholars dissect the Bayeux Tapestry through the lens of Norman or Anglo-Saxon perspectives, alternative historians have woven far wilder theories into its threads, some bordering on the fantastical, others eerily plausible. Take the Templar connection, a favorite among conspiracy circles. Proponents point to the tapestry's mysterious clerics, their robes resembling early Templar garb, and the recurring number 7, a sacred digit for the order in stitch patterns and figure groupings. They highlight the enigmatic Aelfgyva panel, where the whispering cleric's hand gesture mirrors Templar initiation rites. Could this be a covert nod to the order's shadowy influence, stitched decades before their official founding? Skeptics dismiss this as retroactive pattern finding, but the theory gains traction when you consider the tapestry's survival through the centuries protected in Bayeux, a town with rumored Templar ties long after the order's suppression. Then there's the Viking symbolism theory, which reimagines the tapestry as a Norse allegory in disguise. Certain border creatures, the serpentine dragons, the 8-legged horse near Harald's Oath, echo motifs from Scandinavian runestones and sagas. The comet's rendering resembles the Midgard serpent of Viking cosmology, a harbinger of Ragnarök. Even the stitching technique has parallels in Viking Age textile art, particularly the laid and couched method used in surviving Norse burial tapestries. Could this be the work of Anglo-Danish artists, descendants of Viking settlers, threading their cultural memory into a Norman Conquest narrative? It's not impossible Canterbury, where the tapestry was likely made, had a thriving Scandinavian community well into the 11th century. More esoteric interpretations venture into sacred geometry. Some researchers claim the tapestry's layout encodes the golden ratio, with key scenes Harald's coronation, the comet's appearance, aligned to mathematical nodes that mirror medieval mystical diagrams. They note how the linen's dimensions 70 meters by 50 centimeters, approximate ratios found in cathedral architecture, suggesting the tapestry was designed as a portable, energetic map. Others decode the borders as an astronomical calendar, with animal placements corresponding to star positions in 1066. While these theories stretch credulity, they reflect a deeper truth. Medieval artisans saw numbers as divine language, and every measurement carried meaning. The most haunting fringe theory posits the tapestry as a death warrant. Certain legal historians argue its borders hide a trial by cloth, a medieval practice where embroidered indictments were presented to kings. The Aesop's fables in this reading become allegorical charges, the crow tricked by the fox as Harald's alleged perjury, the wolf in sheep's clothing as Norman duplicity. Even the nude figures could symbolize legal nakedness, the exposure of truth. If true, the tapestry wasn't just recording history, it was participating in it, serving as a silent prosecutor in the court of divine judgment. What unites these alternate readings is their recognition of the tapestry's layered intentionality. Whether you see Templar codes or Viking echoes, the common thread is that this medieval masterpiece refuses to be just one thing. Its stitches hold multitudes, conquerors and conquered, history and myth, needlework and necromancy. Perhaps that's why it endures, not despite its mysteries, but because of them. The Bayeux Tapestry's hidden messages aren't just relics of medieval intrigue, they're a mirror to our own era, reflecting timeless battles over truth, power, and whose stories get told. Consider how the tapestry's Norman creators spun a narrative of divine justice to justify invasion, framing Harald's death as cosmic retribution rather than brutal conquest. Sound familiar? Ancient empires carved propaganda into stone, medieval rulers stitched it into fabric, and today, algorithms and media echo chambers shape modern narratives with unsettling precision. The players change, but the game remains the same, controlling the past to control the present. What makes the tapestry's manipulation so chillingly modern is its subtlety. Unlike crude propaganda hammering a single message, it layers perspectives, allowing Norman rulers and English embroiderers to coexist in the same fabric. This duality feels eerily contemporary in an age of deepfake histories and curated social media feeds, where opposing truths compete within the same platform. The tapestry's border fables foxes deceiving crows, wolves posing as shepherds, could slot seamlessly into today's discourse about disinformation, reminding us that weaponized storytelling is as old as civilization itself. Even its gaps whisper to our time. The missing panels mirror modern-day censorship, whether by authoritarian regimes scrubbing dissent from textbooks or corporations burying inconvenient data. The tapestry also exposes how vulnerable history is to editing by the victorious. For centuries, its Norman-centric version of events dominated scholarship, just as colonial histories once erased indigenous voices or Cold War narratives painted conflicts in stark binaries. Yet, like modern activists digging through archives to recover suppressed stories, researchers now decode the tapestry's English embroidery techniques, its fable-laden borders, even the ghostly traces of altered scenes, proof that no narrative is ever truly monolithic. The artisans who stitched Harold's noble moments beside his downfall knew this well. Their needles smuggled nuance into a conqueror's tale, much like today's citizen journalists documenting truths the powerful would rather ignore. Perhaps the most urgent lesson lies in the tapestry's survival. It endured not because it told an unblemished truth, but because its very ambiguity made it useful to shifting powers. Napoleon, the Nazis, even 19th century nationalists all projected their agendas onto its threads. This malleability should unsettle us. In a digital age where historical records can be rewritten with a keystroke, the tapestry reminds us that preservation alone isn't enough. We must actively interrogate who preserved it, why, and what they might have erased. Its delicate stitches, frayed yet enduring, challenge us to ask, what narratives are we being handed today, and whose hands are weaving them? The real power of the Bayeux Tapestry isn't in the answers it gives, but in the questions it forces us to confront. When we study its layered truths and careful omissions, we're not just decoding medieval wool, we're practicing resistance against the idea that history belongs solely to the victors. Every time we peer past its surface to the tensions beneath, we're honing skills to dissect the tapestries of our own time, the news cycles, the viral stories, even the textbooks that will someday shape how future generations understand us. The thread connecting 1066 to today isn't just historical. It's a lifeline reminding us that behind every grand narrative, there are always other hands at work, other voices waiting to be heard. Standing before the Bayeux Tapestry in person, or even exploring high-resolution scans online feels like stepping into a medieval detective story. Every thread holds potential clues, but knowing where to look transforms the experience from passive viewing to active discovery. Start with the margins, those often overlooked borders teeming with strange creatures and cryptic scenes. Train your eye to follow the upper and lower edges like a treasure map, noting where the fables align with key moments in the main narrative. When Harold swears his oath, for instance, a fox and crow appear directly below, a visual echo of deception that's far from accidental. The borders aren't decorations, they're a parallel commentary, and spotting these synchronicities reveals the tapestry's layered storytelling. Next, focus on hands and gestures, the silent language of medieval embroidery. Notice how William's fingers grip his throne during Harold's oath, tension coiled in every stitch, while Harold's own hands hover uncertainly over the relics. Body language here is deliberate. Clenched fists signal authority, relaxed palms suggest innocence, and hidden hands, like those of the shadowy figures flanking the oath scene, often imply manipulation. Even the placement of objects matters. Relics are never just props. Their positioning, whether elevated, obscured, or touched, carries theological weight. The tapestry's creators knew viewers would read these visual cues like a jury weighing evidence. Color plays its own sleight of hand. While centuries have faded the wool, traces of original hues still whisper secrets. Harold's robes, now a muted beige, once shimmered with expensive shellfish purple. A royal color undermining Norman claims he was a usurper. The comet's tail, now pale, originally blazed gold against a deep blue sky, amplifying its role as divine judgment. Modern lighting in the Bayeux Museum casts shadows that obscure some details. So use digital tools to adjust brightness and contrast online, revealing stitches flattened by time. Infrared scans available through scholarly databases expose charcoal under drawings where artists revised scenes, like a sword strike to Harold's thigh later covered by the infamous arrow. Don't ignore the Latin inscriptions. They're not mere captions but loaded terminology. Words like perfidia, treachery, or juravit, he swore, were chosen to frame events with legal and moral precision. Watch for breaks in text like the abrupt "eu Bayeux clericus et Aelfgyva," where a cleric and Aelfgyva, where the unfinished sentence hangs like a cliffhanger. These aren't oversights, they're invitations to lean closer, to wonder what was too dangerous to stitch in full. Finally, embrace the tapestry's physicality. In person, notice how its height, just 50 centimeters, forces viewers to bow slightly, as if paying homage. The linen's width, nearly 70 meters, demands you walk alongside history, feeling the rhythm of its panels like stanzas in an epic poem. Online, zoom in until the threads resolve into individual knots, each a decision made by an unknown hand. Whether you're there in Bayeux or exploring from home, remember, this isn't a relic to admire from a distance. It's a conversation, one where every pulled thread, every altered scene, and every silent margin waits for you to lean in and listen. From the cryptic fables stitched into the borders to the numerical codes hidden in the thread counts, the Bayeux Tapestry refuses to be just one thing: a conqueror's trophy, a victim's lament, or even a straightforward historical record. It's all of these and none of them, a masterpiece that shifts depending on where you stand. The English embroiderers who may have sewn Harold Godwinson's noble death scene, the Norman patrons who demanded celestial omens to justify their invasion, the medieval viewers who recognized Aesop's foxes as sly critiques of power. Each layer adds another voice to the conversation. And that's the real magic of this ancient fabric. It doesn't just tell a story, it argues with itself. Consider the weight of what we've unraveled. The comet that blazes over Harold's reign, stitched as a divine indictment, yet absent from English accounts of his rule. The border animals acting as a medieval comment section, their fables mocking the very narrative they frame. The half-hidden hands reaching into scenes, the ghostly revisions beneath Harold's death, the mysterious Aelfgyva whose name hangs in the air like an unsolved riddle. These aren't accidents, they're proof that history is never just written by the victors. It's also whispered by the vanquished, smuggled into the margins, encoded in threads meant to outlast parchment and stone. So what do we do with these contradictions? We embrace them. Because the tapestry's greatest lesson isn't about the Norman Conquest, it's about the fragility of the stories we're told. Every era has its Bayeux Tapestry, its grand narrative stitched together by those in power. But look closely and you'll always find the loose threads, the uneasy silences, the figures lurking just outside the frame. That's where the truth hides, not in the bold captions, but in the spaces between. Now it's your turn. What patterns do you see in the tapestry's tangled threads? Do the numbers add up to a code, or is the real message in the animals watching from the borders? Was Aelfgyva a real woman, a symbol, or something even stranger? The comments are your canvas. Stitch your theories, debate the gaps, and keep pulling at history's loose ends. Because the past isn't settled, it's waiting to be rewoven, one curious mind